Good evening and welcome to Transistance, your weekly news and commentary show dealing with events from around the world that impact the trans and trans adjacent community. I'm one of your co hosts, Genevieve Bergman.
I'm your other co host, Emily. I hope you all are having a wonderful night tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's jump into our first story, shall we? Um, the Dutch Constitution will be amended to ban LGBTQ plus discrimination. This sounds like very good news to start the day.
This is really super news because with the Dutch Constitution, there were already blanket statements that said that all citizens of the Netherlands shall be treated equally in equal circumstances, and it offered protections based upon religion, belief, political opinion, race, and sex. It also states that discrimination on any other grounds whatsoever shall not be permitted. So the Constitution was already a beautiful piece of saying we're going to make this a protected environment for all people. All people will share equal rights and discrimination will not be allowed on any grounds whatsoever. But then they went ahead and they added in bans on discrimination against sexual orientation and disability. Now, we're still struggling to figure out what discrimination looks like against people with disabilities, even though we've had the Americans with Disabilities Act for, God, decades now. And it still has not been, proven to be effective. But we're hoping, that maybe, just maybe, the Netherlands can show us a little bit about how to make equal rights for all people a possibility.
Yeah, it's so interesting when we have to look outside of our country to find that, considering what we've talked about it before, what our beliefs were on how forward thinking the United States was and how we were the country of freedom and all of that rhetoric. And now it's like
Right.
there's just so many pieces of evidence of why that's not true and why so many other countries are taking the lead on that. So at least somebody is stepping forward on it. I like that.
Absolutely.
Moving over to the UK for an in-depth look into how the UK will ban conversion therapy, but they've added back in the clause of transgender folks in there.
Right. This has been a contentious back and forth for, I want to say, almost a year. The movement to place a ban on conversion therapy began right around this time last year, but there had been a disagreement on whether or not that ban should include a ban on conversion therapy for people who are transgender, non binary. Groups such as the LGB Alliance were pushing hard to ensure that conversion therapy would exclude transgender people. Now that we're seeing this shift back to including transgender therapy, conversion therapy banned, we also have to look at what is the possibility of this getting done at a reasonable amount of time. And that's where things are beginning to look a little more difficult. It looks like this is going to stretch out for some time because, first of all, we cannot get the UK government to basically squash any conversation that denies transgender people their rights. We have also seen a lot of pressure within the government to ensure that transgender people are being treated not as gender equals, but as gender imposters. We've seen people such as J.K. Rowling who have a huge influence upon how things are being done in the UK right now. And it's looking kind of iffy on whether or not this will actually get carried through. This may be just some early promises to kind of smooth things over with Scotland, but with Ireland also, or with Wales also pushing in the direction of trying to create a better place for transgender recognition. And in just a little bit, I think we're gonna talk about Ireland moving in a very similar direction. So it may be that the UK is just throwing out a few little, breadcrumbs to make it look like they are acquiescing to including transgender people in their conversion ban.
It's nice that the hint is that they're removing this because it's really important to remember that conversion therapy does not work. It's
Right.
extremely harmful. People revert back to their behavior anyways after a certain amount of time. But what you've done is you've scarred and hurt them without achieving your goal. So conversion therapy is a bad thing regardless of what you're using it for. The evidence is out there that it's a very bad thing and it's ineffective, and I'm I'm hoping that UK follows through with this and does include transgender folks in that ban of conversion therapy.
Interesting side note that is, just the irony of it all. The UK actually considers conversion therapy a form of torture, but they're willing to keep it for transgender people.
That's just lovely. Okay, so now we get deeper into the fight regarding the gender reform bill that Scotland has put forth, and the Tories are blaming equal pay and same sex spaces for blocking the Scottish gender reform bill.
Basically, this is bullshit. They're trying to make their bigotry sound like they are trying to protect cisgender women.
Mhm.
What they are arguing is that the decision to exclude transgender people from recognition was based upon the Equality Act of 2010, and that if they allowed transgender people that that level of respect and that level of equal treatment, then things such as single sex clubs, and we're not talking about sex clubs, we're talking about like women's only clubs or men's only clubs, associations, schools, but also protections such as equal pay. The feeling is that the bill risks creating significant complications from having two different gender recognition regimes in the UK and allowing more fraudulent or bad faith applications. So, once again, not only are we being accused of guilt by association when it comes to predators, but now we are also being looked at guilt by association for frauds and hucksters. Thanks, UK, for giving us a whole new level of crimes that we don't commit, but you want to associate with us.
Yeah, just more of that throwing anything up on the wall to see what'll stick
Yeah,
to the transgender community as a negative so that you can push forward your nasty agenda.
exactly.
Ah. Um, well, the Scottish government fundamentally rejects the offer to work with the Tories on the revised bill.
The Tories were like, hey, we want to sit down and we want to talk with you about a possibility of maybe working through this and finding something that was kind of equitable. And the Scots said, oh, no, go yourself. But basically, they were like, no, we're not going to sit down with you. We're not going to talk with you about this. You showed no good faith in doing this. You showed no cooperation in doing this. You told us you weren't going to do this. You didn't give it a fair shake. So why don't you go and find my sheep and tend to them?
Very colorful response. I love it.
Thank
I
you very
love it.
much.
I'm sure that was direct quotes, all direct quotes.
All direct
All
quotes,
direct
all
quotes.
from the Scottish Prime Minister.
Just kidding, y'all. Just kidding. Just wanted to put
Rosa,
that in.
goddamn, rough crowd tonight. Rough crowd tonight.
um, Russia has been ordered to recognize same-sex relationships by Europe's top court. What is going on here?
So you have Russia, which is doing everything within its power to criminalize LGBTQ plus people within Russia. They are also trying to do everything they can to militarily subsume the Ukraine into their control. And now they are rumbling that they're willing to consider a nuclear option if they can't get Ukraine. So the European Court of Human Rights has been dealing with a case where three queer couples were fighting for legal recognition and protection after they were denied the ability to get married in Russia. So the European Court of Human Rights has been dealing with this case since before the invasion of Ukraine. Now the court has come forward and they have said Russia must make way to allow recognition for queer couples, for queer marriages. And this is a part of the broader, you know European connection that's there. It's possible that this will have some kind of negative impact on Russia as they kind of try to move forward, but at the same time, as long as Vladimir Putin, not Putin, Putin is in place, there is going to be considerable rejection of this. We're not going to see, um, we're not going to see Russia back down from their anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric. We're not going to see them back down from their um, antagonistic behaviors. So this is a nice move on the part of the European court, but at the same time, this is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But we can always hope.
Mhm. And what is it in the relationship of Europe and Russia that gives them the at least the apparent authority to make some sort of demand like this to them?
Well, the European, Court on Human Rights is, just one step below the United Nations
Mm,
human rights committees. So with the European Court, you could kind of look at it like the European Court is the appeals courts or the district courts here in the U.S. If somebody does something in one of the states, it goes up to U.S. District Court for an appeal. So this is going to be that. The next step is that if Russia doesn't recognize this, it could bounce up to the UN, and we could be looking at sanctions. We could be looking at different forms of disciplinary action from the UN on this.
interesting. Yeah, that's crazy how that works with the sort of like you said, like an appellate system. Like this is
Right.
the lower
Now there's
court
no
slapping
there's no
them.
direct connection, there's no direct link,
Mhm.
but at the same time, we're the UN is going to be looking at the European Court of Human Rights to make a huge decision on whether or not human rights are being respected. We are in the middle of watching Russia commit war crimes in Ukraine. So when you throw all of this in together, three queer couples wanting to be married in Russia may not appear to be much, but at the same time, if all of this gets lumped together as a war crimes case, then we may see that, this may be a broader human rights concern.
Now let's move on to the story that rocked our world here, at least. In you just it's just how scary this proposal is. But what a new West Virginia obscenity bill could potentially jail people for transgender exposure to minors, which, as it's written, just basically being transgender near minors.
Senate Bill 252 and Senate Bill 278 were released almost at the same time earlier last week, or they were introduced at the same time last week. In both of those bills, it is addressing matters of obscene definition. And in the first one, there was a lot of focus on schools and the association with being on school property, and people were saying, "Oh, well, this only applies to schools." In the second one, though, it becomes a little clearer that what 278 is referencing and what 252 is also tied with is a portion of the West Virginia Code, Section 61A8 1. It is the definitions of obscene matter to minors. So, I'm going to put the text of this in the chat. So, if anybody wants to look this up, you are more than welcome to. Um, this is the code, the section of the Code of West Virginia that is being edited to read this: for the purposes of any prohibition, protection, or requirement under any and all articles and sections of the Code of West Virginia protecting children from exposure to indecent displays of a sexually explicit nature, such prohibited displays shall include, but not be limited to, any transvestite and or transgender exposure, performances, or display to any minor. Now, this is directly within the definitions of what obscene matter is described as. Obscene matter is already described as um, any type of material that appeals to the prurient interests, anything that is patently offensive, sexually explicit conduct, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Now, those three right there have been categorically defined as obscene material definitions. But what West Virginia has now done is they're adding this line that says it shall include, but not be limited to, transvestite and or transgender exposure, performance, or display to any minor. What we're worried about is what exposure or display mean. Because of the words that are defined, those two words are not clearly defined, nor is it set out what those words mean. But from the broadest understanding of this, since this is it's put within the section of the code that deals with obscene matter, in the same way that pornography, whether it be printed or video or uh, um, sexual explicit activity in a club, along those lines, what this is saying is that any effort of a transgender person to expose themselves or display themselves to a minor. And I'm not talking about in a nudity form, because that is what is stated here. It says that any transgender exposure. So what I've been reading to you is section 618A-1.
Mhm.
In section 618A-2, under the penalties for exposing minors to obscene matter, any adult, and this is A under section 618A-2, any adult with knowledge of the character of the matter who knowingly and intentionally distributes, offers to distribute, or displays to a minor any obscene matter is guilty of a felony, and upon conviction thereof shall be fined not more than $25,000 or confined in a state correctional facility for not more than 5 years, or both. So what this is saying, it looks like in the original bills that it would be just a misdemeanor the first time, a misdemeanor the second time, and a felony the third time. But what this does is that it goes one step further. If anyone tries to argue that a transgender person is approaching a child, they would be guilty of knowledge of the character of the matter. They knew that they were a transgender person, and intentionally distributing and displaying to a minor any obscene matter. Remember, the definition of obscene matter would be changed in section 61A2-1 so that obscene matter includes any transgender exposure. They would essentially, if you walk into the presence of a child, you are now guilty of a felony. You would be charged under this law, and you could be sentenced up to 5 years in a state correctional facility with a fine of $25,000. And if there were multiple children in that group, that would be multiplied times the number of children in that group.
Wow. Oh, yeah, it is. Hold on.
And one of the scariest things about this is the first time a bill like this has been shown in public. It is very likely going to be repeated in other states before the end of the year, so that we know that trans antagonistic states are going to want to try to pass this where they are. I happened to look at the West Virginia Senate and House. It is predominantly Republican. The possibility that this could pass is very high.
And that's just terrifying. The fact that this even has a vague chance of passing is terrifying, but the fact that it has a any kind of likelihood.
Mhm. Well, and we've seen very few trans antagonistic bills defeated. We've seen very few of them, actually made null and void.
Mhm,
Because even if they have been made null and void, they come back the next year.
mhm. Yeah, I just don't understand how you can make what is it? Well, in Virginia at least it's 28,000 plus citizens just suddenly illegal. And in the United States it's I think what over 5 million of us.
Are you
Because
talking transgender people?
yes.
Um, the numbers are really fluctuating right now, but best case numbers would be close to 5 million.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just going off of sort of the average of about 1.6
Yeah.
percent of the population, and that works out to be over 5 million Americans and over 28,000 West Virginians. And it's just it seems absurd that a bill could be passed that would make that many people just straight up illegal, just for
Well,
being who they are and who have been for decades.
it's absurd until you take a step back and you watch what the tactics are on the other side.
Hmm.
Because what the tactics are on the other side is to recognize that we are not a people group, that we are a group of mentally ill individuals who have received bad psychiatric interventions. And therefore, they are looking at us as victims and they want to get us the help that we need because we have been deceived.
Doesn't
That
doesn't seem
is
like
the
this is very
approach.
helpful.
I mean, that's the approach, though.
Mhm,
They are looking at
mhm,
this as like, look, these transgender people, I've been convinced that they are allowed to be sexually obscene individuals in public because our demeanor has been connected with sexual obscenity for decades. And now they are using that history, which has been refuted over and over again, but they're using that definition that's decades old to make their entire argument.
mhm. I agree with what Beverly commented in the chat that it'll get passed and signed into law and then will be found unconstitutional. But what happens in between then, the level of harassment and uh, just the the backstepping that we'll see in the amount of rights that people have in that state, it'll be unbelievable.
Well,
And so many people have to live that. And
but I mean, please keep in mind that by the end of the year, we could see this in maybe 5 to 7 states.
mhm,
This is just January and they're just introducing it. This was a this was somebody throwing a line out in the water to see who's going to bite. West Virginia is insignificant in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the transgender population. It's not a hotbed of transgender activity, but this is going to be a test case for other states to look at this and say, "Oh, hold our beers. Um, we can definitely match that because that's what we've seen them do."
mhm. A judge denies a request for mental exams of 12-year-olds in Medicaid transgender lawsuit. What brought this about?
So this is originally out of Florida. This was a case that challenged the state prohibiting Medicaid from covering gender affirming care for transgender people, which, I mean, we knew that was coming, that people were going to challenge that. And we're seeing some of the results of that as the case is happening right now. But two 12-year-olds are plaintiffs in this case. And the attorneys for the DeSantis administration asked to be able to perform mental examinations on these 12-year-olds because they wanted to discover whether or not they were truly gender dysphoric so that they did qualify for gender affirming procedures. Now, the judge denied that. U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle released a 2-page decision and basically, came right out and said, this is not going to happen. The decision noted that the state's motion identified an expert, Geeta Nangia, a South Carolina based psychiatrist, that her qualifications as a psychiatrist who treats children and adolescents had no reference to addressing her as having experience with transgender youth. Her expert report, the decision said, not mentioned in the motion, says she has treated over 1,000 patients with gender dysphoria, but the report does not indicate how many of those patients, if any, she supported in their identified gender. So basically, you have a judge who's stepping in and say, okay, state, you want me to consider this expert to take two 12-year-olds, give them a mental examination, and yet you have not shown with any credibility that this individual has the capacity to interview, evaluate, and diagnose transgender youth, much less provide for their care in their identified gender. This judge deserves a medal of some kind. Um, basically is like, no, we're not doing this. Um, the judge pointed out in a November 15 scheduling order in which he said that under court rules, the plaintiffs could have to undergo appropriate examinations, but no individual will be required to submit to an examination by a transgender denier or skeptic, because the current motion does not address whether Dr. Najia is a transgender denier or skeptic. This order denies the motion. Any renewed motion should address how many patients Dr. Nangia has supported in their identified gender. Any renewed motion should also address how any finding from an examination might affect a ruling on the controlling substantive issue of whether treatments at issue are experimental. I mean, basically, this judge looked at the DeSantis attorneys and said, get your shit straight. I already
Mhm.
told you, don't bring any of this crap into my courtroom. I mean, that's what the judge is saying in probably some of the most covert judge language you could possibly do. Um, but the judge is looking beyond just the fact that, oh, this person has credentials in this area. This judge is looking at the case.
And the credentials and whether or not the credentials actually fit with what's going on in the case.
Yes,
That's great to hear. That is
that is
so
really good
awesome.
to hear.
hmm Okay, anti-LGBTQ extremism is no match for Minnesota's first trans lawmaker. What's going on
Minnesota
here?
State Representative Lee Fink was sworn into office on January 3rd and is already hitting the ground running, trying to do their best to push back against anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. The first items up for bid on their agenda are focusing on banning conversion therapy, creating abortion access, and passing the trans refuge bill into law, thus making Minnesota the next state or another state in the trans refuge system that is being established. Fink said it is because we have the trifecta that we can push forward. We can say this is a priority for our community and we want it to be heard with an expectation that it will follow through, or at least on the House side. I can't speak for the Senate. Gotta love that. But at the same time, we have representation in this place, and being able to step forward and push for these rights within a state that, I mean, Minnesota has some good protections and good um things happening in direction for trans LGBTQ plus and women's rights, but it's nice to see a little more intentional effort.
Mhm. Well, and I just love the steps forward that Minnesota has been making. Minnesota has
Yeah.
proven itself to be quite a good refuge for trans people and trans realism. you know,
Right,
the
yeah,
understanding of what it really means to be trans and why trans rights are important and why electing representatives is important. It's great to see even more representation there than we already did have.
yeah.
All right. Moving on to Florida. Florida lawmakers consider extending Don't Say Gay law up to sixth grade.
This is not a surprise. We knew that this expansion was going to happen. They're looking at moving the Parental Rights in Education Act up from the third grade to the sixth grade. Some of the background talk has been, oh, we can't go into high school because high school students should be mature enough to handle it. But at the same time, the original bill said that they can only be presented with material for which they are developmentally appropriate. So any parent can deem that their child is not developmentally at a place to receive that education. And so that's when the power of the parent to sue the school district comes into play. But right now, they are moving this up to sixth grade. I would not be surprised if towards, well, probably next year, we'll see them push for complete.
I can't even comment. I can't. I it's just been so interesting to watch this, hearing just my entire life about conservatives trying to push back against sex education at all, and the parents should be able to do it, but then you find that parents don't do it. They don't have the conversations, and then we have, you know, rampant teen pregnancy because their idea that abstinence is the only way to go,
Mhm.
and it doesn't work when you're talking about horny teenagers a lot of the time.
Right.
Uh, so it's just been a really interesting to watch that kind of ebb and flow my entire life. And then now we have the Don't Say Gay bill. It's like you can't teach them at all or say anything about it,
Right.
especially not if you're talking about in any way the existence of LGBT people, ideals, that sort of a thing.
Right.
It's really interesting. Republican wants to expand the definition of child pornography to make it easier to ban LGBTQ plus books. This is not at all surprising.
A freshman representative has just stepped up and said, what we want to do is we want to include in child pornography any visual depiction, including photograph, film, video, picture, cartoon, drawing, computer, or computer generated image or picture, whether or not made or produced by electronic, mechanical, or other means, or any other form of depiction of explicit sexual conduct. It also, repeals the exemptions for those who possess or disseminate obscene materials for activities related to school, university, college, museum, and public libraries, which means that if somebody goes into an art museum and there happens to be a nude statue there, the protection around that art would no longer be in place. But essentially, what they want to do is they want to ban anything that would allow youth access to obscene materials that would also define things such as sexual identity, gender identity, sexual orientation. So, um, yeah. And if we just roll back to West Virginia, we are looking at them wanting to change the definition of obscene matter.
Mm,
So you can write this in colored pencil, mark the date, and say, Jeannie says this is going to include transgender people in Wyoming eventually.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same playbook, just a different
Yep.
specific thing that they're attacking.
Yeah.
Republicans say they will sue Arizona's governor because she protected LGBTQ plus people. That sounds like a logical reaction here? What's going?
Well, it is a logical reaction when you're an illogical people. The Republican lawmakers in Arizona that essentially, just last week we reported on, um, wrote legislation that would, out trans kids. But we also reported in the same week that the new governor, Katie Hobbs, had put into place an executive order that offered protections to LGBTQ plus state employees from discrimination. Well, that angered the Arizona Freedom Caucus and Republican State Representative Jake Hoffman, and basically said that they are going to do everything to obstruct Governor Hobbs in every step of the process if she continues to utilize executive orders. So essentially, if the governor uses executive orders for anything else, the Republicans are going to step in the way of the governor acting upon their constitutional right within the state.
Yeah, I just find it so interesting that one of the parties is about restricting the rights of citizens in America, where the other one is just like, no, they shouldn't be discriminated against. And that is going to get the Republican, again, talking about the Republican playbook. Well, we'll just shut down government then because we're not going to get our way on everything all the time. So you're just not ever going to be able to accomplish anything.
Right.
Same thing we saw with Obama, and just basically ever since.
Well, hell, this goes all the way back to George Bush, the 2000 election. The year of the hanging Chad. It's been a constant battle between the two sides since 2000 to say we're going to see what we can do to obstruct the other side.
Mhm. Obstructing government, obstructing the rights of the people. Interesting strategy.
Yeah.
The GOP bill would throw librarians in prison if they didn't remove books about sexual or gender identity.
North Dakota, which I happened to be speaking with somebody from North Dakota, and they showed me the list of 20 plus pieces of legislation that are currently being talked about in North Dakota. But this one would take a librarian, sentence them to 30 days in prison, a $1,500 fine if they do not remove any items that depict sexual identity, gender identity, as well as sexual preference, sexual intercourse, or sexual perversion. Yeah, Mike LaFleur is the House Majority Leader who put this forward and said that public libraries contain books featuring disturbing and disgusting content, and argued that a child's exposure to such content has been associated with addiction, poor self esteem, devalued intimacy, increasing divorce rates, unprotected sex among young people, and poor well being. Which so is poverty, but I don't see them doing anything to get rid of that.
I'll have to look into that claim because that seems a bit silly here.
Well, no, it's valid. It is. I mean, it's a valid claim. All right, that exposure to certain elements can be shown to increase the likelihood of the things that he listed. But poverty can do the same, abuse can do the same, early introduction to smoking and alcohol can do the same. See, it's not about the substance that they are exposed to. What it is it's about the social ills that we experience as a nation in allowing children to fall through the cracks and allowing them to suffer the worst of society. Now, a public library full of books, not not a contributing cause. It is a contributing cause to diminished Republican association, but it's not linked to the increase of these societal ills. So, I mean, this is not a he's not trying to quote facts, Emily. What he's trying to do is he's trying to fearmonger.
Yeah. Another one, GOP bill would fine people $1,500 for using the correct pronouns for trans people.
So, right
Wow.
up front, this one didn't even make it out of committee. It came up and they were like, "You're kidding, right?" SB 2199 wanted to change the definition of gender, stating that words used to reference an individual's sex, gender, gender identity, or gender expression mean the individual's determined sex at birth, male or female. The bill isn't just limited to students, though. The words referring to an individual person, employer, employee, contestant, participant, member, student, or juvenile must be used in the context of that person's sex as determined at birth. The bill also says that gender is established by the individual's deoxyribonucleic acid, which for most of us, we just say DNA. The thing is that it's not the DNA that determines the gender. It is the sex chromosomes that are a part of DNA, which are attributed to the development of primary and secondary sexual organs in development. Gender doesn't come along until after someone is born and brought into society.
So there's one word that stood out to me there in that list.
Deoxyribonucleic acid.
No, that one seemed to make sense there. In the whole doesn't make any sense sort of context, but contestant.
Mm.
So if you go on The Price is Right and they use your preferred pronouns, then Drew Carey could be fined $1,500 essentially.
Okay, so
Is that what kind of contestant they're talking about? Because
so
that's what that's where my brain went, and I thought that was hilariously ridiculous.
okay, I hate to be the one to do this because um because it's really going to ruin my reputation to say this. But most likely it is in reference to a sporting event or another contest sponsored by an athletic or school association.
Okay, so it is still school related and not
Right.
necessarily game show related.
Not
Thank you.
necessarily game show related, but it could be. It could be.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
The
And
more you
again,
know.
I don't I don't want people to get this confused. I am still not a sport ball person.
I love the ways where I can push you in that direction, though. Push you to make comment on it at least. I think we have a sports story or two here tonight. I'll have to make sure that you have to do those. Ron DeSantis demands universities give information about students' gender affirming care. So, more of this outing and registering of trans people.
Yeah, and this one is scarier because now it is demanding information on adults.
Mhm.
We're talking about universities. We're not talking about high schools. We're not talking about minors. We're talking about individuals who have met the criteria for being classified as an adult. We're talking about individuals who have, reached that threshold where they have the protections of independent adult living. So now what happened? The DeSantis administration reached out to numerous Florida universities wanting to know the number of people that the universities provide services to who suffer from gender dysphoria. Now, at that juncture right there, suffering from gender dysphoria makes that a medical issue. And if a university released any information directly connected to a student's medical history, they would be putting themselves in the place of a lawsuit that would be out of this world. But as Autumn is saying, this is essentially one of the steps that's being taken to create a list of transgender people in Florida. Because it's no big step to go from how many students to let's look at the university's student body and determine who that is. So they are trying every way possible. And look, we're talking Texas and Florida have both now made overtures that look like the beginnings of a registration list. Ken Paxton in Texas went after the DMV motors information and how many people have changed their names. And now you have DeSantis going after university students, trying to find out how many universities are servicing gender dysphoric students. You have these two efforts to form what is basically a registration of transgender people. And at this point, it may not look like a big thing, but this is scary. This is very scary. The thing is that you take a registration list, you take the criminalization of transgender people, and you put that together with the other part of Senate Bill 278 in West Virginia, which would allow police to enter into a domicile of a suspected transgender person with a minor. That is all of the information that they would need to get a warrant. They would enter into that home. They would seize that transgender person. The minor would be taken and put into the system of the state, and the domicile could be seized and sold at state auction. That's what the rest of 278 was about, was the use of property in association with obscene matter. One thing to take notice is that the West Virginia bills do not require that they have to be in a prison. They can be in a mental correctional facility as well.
Yeah. Another vagary that they put into that law was just a correctional facility.
Yep. So it'd be very easy to put somebody in a psychiatric hospital in the criminal wing and put them through forced conversion therapy, which is what we were talking about with the Republican platform in Texas. That is what they were moving toward.
Mm-hmm. Moving on, Ohio school district sued after allowing transgender students to access communal bathrooms.
The Dayton area Bethel Local School District had made it possible for transgender students to use restrooms of their identity. American First Legal, which is a conservative, probably Christian based law firm, has brought suit on the part of 18 anonymous parents and students because a 14-year-old transgender student was permitted to use the girls' restroom. The filing argues that restrooms and other intimate facilities should only be shared by persons of the same biological sex for a variety of reasons, including safety, privacy, modesty, religion, and historical views of sex. What one's biology has to do with safety, privacy, modesty, religion, and historical views of sex confounds this commentator. But at the same time, it's a matter of saying there's been no evidence that people are at risk. What we've seen is people having a panic response. And that panic response is their own damn business. It's not the transgender person who is causing them harm. It is their own panic that is causing the harm.
Mm-hmm. And what that is that's a panic based on all of this rhetoric and fear mongering that's been happening. Again, there are no statistics that back up that people are in any way under greater risk for harm because of the acceptance of transgender people.
Right. I mean, this is the Doberman Pinscher defense, meaning that, well, a Doberman Pinscher is an aggressive dog. It's an aggressive breed of dog. Therefore, we are not going to allow Doberman Pinschers on our properties. You can't have a Doberman Pinscher and have a certain apartment or live in a certain housing development or in a certain, community or a certain county or a certain city. If you have a Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd or a pit bull or a Rottweiler, you can't own any of those dogs because they're aggressive breeds. Now, transgender people are an aggressive breed. That's it.
Oh, God.
So from now on, if you are in a public space and somebody is looking at you weird, just look back at them and go.
Okay. That is one potential reaction. Yes.
Look, if they think we're crazy, why not live into
Why
it?
not give him crazy?
Look,
I,
Tim,
I
this is serious shit, and I am trying to lighten it up as much as I can, okay? We've got,
I
I mean, this is kind of like the episode of The X Files where the creepy family and, um, I don't know if, never mind. I'm not going to
yeah, let's
just
not get into
suffice
an
it to say
episode
that
synopsis.
The X Files, when it was a really bad episode, it was also one of the funniest. So I'm trying to level it out.
And I still want to do an expose on the whole bathroom thing because I got into a big conversation about that today. And it's the perceived danger that cis women have been whipped into over what trans people are. That whole belief that trans people are pedophiles and sex offenders and just creeps trying to skis on women. Um, and so you've got that. It's just a kind of a straw man, whipped up fear sort of a thing contrasted to a Reuters article that I found from a few years ago that said that 1 in 4 transgender teens who are forced to use the bathroom that doesn't coordinate with their gender identity is sexually assaulted,
Yeah.
and that trans women, uh, trans girls who were born male are twice as likely to get sexually assaulted um, of the trans bunch.
Yeah.
Um, and so you've got the fear, and you've got actual statistics of the real actual danger for transgender people, and this perceived fear is trumping and taking precedent over the actual danger that trans people face.
Yeah.
um, Plus the fact, my favorite thing to bring up is, people are afraid of someone coming in and sexually assaulting, committing, the R word against women, which just blows my mind because that is one of the most egregious felonies out there. Like, we all agree that is horrible. That rape is horrible. And what they're saying is, in their argument, that making it illegal for trans people to use a bathroom is going to stop people from going in and raping women, because while you're committing the most egregious felony possible, if it is a misdemeanor to go into a room that has an unlocked room that has a W on the door, that is going to stop you. And it's like, what have you bumped your head on? That doesn't make any sense. A person that is going to do that horrendous act is going to go to whatever links, and they don't care about the other things, especially the freaking misdemeanor. Which, by the way, I wasn't able to find any laws in America that specifically say that it's illegal for people to use the opposite bathroom. There's trespassing laws that sort of seem to can be applied in the courtroom, but there's nothing that specifically says it. So
And
technically, I don't think
and
it's illegal.
that is what law is referenced. It is a trespass, meaning that it is an area designated for a certain group, and if you enter into that without appropriate permissions, you are then committing a trespass.
Mm.
It's just like if you go into the back section of a store where it's marked employees only. If you step into that portion of the store, you are now committing a trespass, and you can be, they can call the cops on you. They don't
Mm.
have to have a reason. You are committing a trespass. It's the same thing with the restrooms, and that's the again, vagueness is the power of the government.
Hmm.
If they keep it vague, they can use it for anything.
Yeah. But like I said, it doesn't apply to rapists because they're going to do what they're going to do regardless. So,
Shannon, I disagree with you completely. Um, it's not specifically Southern Baptist states. Um, this is broader than just one single solitary branch of Christianity. This is across a swath of different faith experiences, and it's when you have evangelical Christians, radical feminists, and white supremacists all arguing the same thing, you're really kind of you're taking in a whole swath of demographic that can't be completely, you know, packed together neatly.
Let's
Yeah.
finally move on.
Hang on, one more comment there.
One more comment. Okay, not moving
Yeah,
on.
we had mass shootings, we had sex stings, abductions, drug overdoses. We also have, um, you know, inflation that is out the wazoo. We have corporations who are price gouging on many different areas because they are raking in record profits while at the same time sticking it to the consumer. We also have some very hard situations around the world, in addition to a two-party controlled system of government that is nothing but two bickering children in the back seat of a station wagon in the 1970s driving through Death Valley. So yeah, we are the grand distraction. We are what politicians are using to keep everybody focused on one thing while they go and do something else. So every time a politician starts screaming about transgender people, look and see what their left hand is doing. Look and see what's going on behind their back. Look and see what they are doing that they don't want you to see because they are the greatest prestidigitators in the history of the world.
Look at the birdie. Look at the birdie.
Yep.
All right. Now we'll move on to Utah, where Republicans exclude cysteine breast implants from trans care ban. So this is what we were talking about before. Exactly the exclusions that they work into these anti-trans bills that are it's the mental gymnastics, the abandonment of logic. It's mind-blowing sometimes. What is going on as we dive into this one?
This one takes in insanity to a whole new level.
Mm-hmm.
So, Senate Bill 16 has come up in Utah that would ban gender affirming care for trans youth, specifically targeting surgical procedures, as many of these do, but there are none happening in Utah. Democratic Utah Senator Luz Escamilla, proposed an amendment because the Republicans are promoting this as about protecting kids from making, monumental mistakes in altering their body as teenagers. So, Senator Escamilla offered an amendment to the bill, and she submitted the amendment that said simply a ban on plastic surgery on all minors unless it is medically necessary. Now, all now we've talked about this. We did a story toward the end of the year where we talked about the number of plastic surgeries that are being done on teens and how many of those are aesthetic plastic surgery procedures.
Not only that, but you pointed out that they're gender affirming care.
They are gender affirming care. So the senator argued, if we are going to take away the ability for parents to make decisions with their providers, then all children should be included and not targeted at a specific group of kids. Wow, fundamentally logical.
There we go. There's a little bit of it, a little bit of logic sprinkled in on top.
Senator Michael Kennedy, who was the chief sponsor of the bill, said that he opposed banning breast implants for cisgender kids. Do you know why? Do you know why, class? Do you know why you would have somebody who would say, no, we need to let these teenagers get their little hooties boosted?
Why would a male, a cisgender male, say that teenage girls should be allowed to get breast implants? Wow, that's hard. I don't know the answer to that. That's
Here's
not
the
creepy at
argument
all.
that Senator Michael Kennedy proposed. The reason why cisgender kids should be able to get breast implants is they've been getting them for a long time, so that makes it acceptable.
Um, haven't transgender people been getting care for a while now?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that the argument holds any water. I think
No,
that
and
the
neither
more
does my
obvious
whiskey
answer,
when I have it, but I can't have it. So,
I think the more obvious answer makes a lot more sense.
yeah.
That this is a creep.
When the final vote was taken in the committee, all 5 Republicans voted against the amendment. The Democrats, all 2 of them, voted for the amendment. The bill went forward as originally written, which would allow cisgender femme persons to receive breast implants. And it passed committee and is going to the full Senate.
This is the identical sort of idea to the fact that they will ban gender affirming care for people
Yeah.
and leave the loophole in it that they can perform essentially sexual reassignment surgery on infants if the doctor can't tell what their genitalia means as far as their sex. The doctor can
Non-consensual,
arbitrarily decide.
non-consensual
Mhm.
gender assignment surgery. That is the big thing to remember because these children, we are being told, don't have the ability to consent
Mhm.
to gender affirming care.
Mhm.
So, gender assigning care has to be recognized as it is being done as non consensual.
Yep.
I got us completely off track. We were just going to go through the states like this. So,
Yeah, we're long overdue for a break, and we've got a lot to go through. Let's jump into these then. Let's make this a rapid fire as we get out of this segment here. Wisconsin GOP makes conversion therapy legal again. God damn it!
yeah, they had just banned it um, in 2020. And now the Republicans have gotten back into control and they have um, reversed that. And now conversion therapy is once again legal in that state.
It doesn't work. It just harms people. Ugh. Mississippi bill uses abortion ban tactic to target trans care.
Yep. What they have done in this bill is that they have included doctors who knowingly perform gender reassignment surgery. They have lumped them in with doctors who perform or induce an abortion. Um, so they've lumped all of them together into the same category and, assigned the same punishment to all of them.
Going back to Florida, we just can't get out of there. A state employee alleges Florida sidestepped the process in excluding gender affirming care for Medicaid.
So this is a shock to no one. Basically, somebody is coming forward with the evidence that says that the group that was responsible for determining that gender affirming care would not be accessible in Florida, that would be the Agency for Healthcare Administration, ignored all of the medical standards of gender affirming care to make a decision. So somebody has come forward, they provide evidence of how they have just basically taken what they wanted out of medical studies and used that to justify eliminating gender affirming care. Barely Beverly, they didn't have to run it past the governor. All they had to do was get that overturned in a committee.
Anti-LGBTQ plus 1 million moms group rages over Disney cartoon with talking fire trucks and apparently some lesbian moms. What's going on here and why is this a thing?
So Firebuds is a show on Disney Junior. The 1 Million Moms has basically, come out in protest because one of the main characters, Violet, has 2 moms in the Vega Vaughn family. In addition, you may remember that the 1 Million Moms came out against Lightyear because there was a lesbian kiss of approximately 0.47 seconds long in that movie. Also, back in 2017, there was a same sex couple in an episode of Doc McStuffins. And of course, if you keep up with it, Blue's Clues went Pride.
Side note again, isn't 1 million moms like several thousand moms?
Yeah, it's about 45,000. It's 1 million moms or 45,000 Karens. It goes either way.
Yeah, however the math works on that. A gender critical activist quotes Adolf Hitler in a speech against trans rights at Posey Parker rally.
You had an individual who spoke out at this gender critical event and was directly quoting Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler and essentially was talking about the big lie and said, now this is funny, okay? She said, do you know the big lie? The big lie was first described by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf.
That's the
And
2020
then,
election thing?
no, but then began to quote, you know, that, the big lie is such a big lie that ordinary people like us think, well, that can't be a lie because I would never tell such a big lie as that when they only lie in small ways. The big lie, she goes on to say, was begun by men in the early part of the 20th century. It began when they had an erotic fantasy and they decided they were going to sell us the big lie. And what is the big lie? The big lie is that trans women are women, but they're not. They're men, and we know that.
I'm just so tired of having to justify who I am and why I am, which is backed by so many medical organizations and so much scientific fact that it's just not even going to address it. A trans woman was banned from praying at a yeshiva university synagogue.
So Talia Avrahami, we talked about a few months back after they came out as non-binary, they were released from their position at a teaching school, a Jewish teaching school, in an attempt to try and, just connect with their faith again. In the process of that, the local rabbi switched, and the individual who came in was not as accepting of them and then banned them from attending and
Wow.
and making prayers.
Wow. An Iowa Catholic diocese banned preferred pronouns and will force LGBTQ plus students to go to bathrooms of their biological sex. And advocates say the policy is part of a growing trend causing severe harm.
Yeah, this is the Diocese of Des Moines. It includes 17 schools and 80 parishes in southwest Iowa. It went into effect a week ago. The policies are established as binding for diocesan parishes, schools, organizations, and institutions of the Catholic Church in the Diocese of Des Moines. So, under the policy, no one may designate a preferred pronoun. The diocese said people must use the bathroom or locker room that matches their biological sex, and they are to follow the dress code or uniform that accords with their biological sex. Participation in school or parish activities must be consistent with the biological sex of the participant. The diocese also barred using gender affirming medical treatments like puberty blockers, saying no person is permitted to have on site or to distribute any medications for the purpose of gender reassignment. Anyone who questions their gender should be guided to appropriate ministers and counselors. That's fucking scary right there.
Let's keep going through because we've got a whole lot of good stories to get to at the end here. So we'll just keep pushing through.
There's good news. There's good news.
There's good news.
It's
just
over the rainbow.
Just hang in tight. This one might get a little bit more fun. Christian conservatives petition to cancel HBO Max's Velma.
I've not partaken of HBO Max's Velma series. So I went to the only expert that I know, Andrew, and basically he said the show was garbage anyway, so it really didn't matter. So, yeah.
All right. A teenager saw a trans woman showering in a women's locker room. It ended with riot police. I think I spoiled this one a little earlier. I didn't realize we had this one.
Well, you spoiled the front end. Now we get to now we get to talk about the back end. Emily's already laid out that there was a person in the shower stall. A cisgender girl sees transgender girl in the shower, makes a hullabaloo, and then a protest is called for. And that's when things get a little bit crazy because the anti-trans group For Choice arranged a protest. About 300 people showed up, and what happened was is that protesters and counter protesters were started, sort of facing off against each other, and then all of a sudden, um, a hockey game broke out. No, a riot broke out, and they had to call in the cops to break up the riot.
Just a quick note on this one. We already commented a lot on this. No incident happened in the locker room.
Nope.
The cisgender girl saw the backside of a trans girl and freaked out, and that's where all of this comes from. There
Yep.
was no assault, there was no attempted assault, there was no comment, there was nothing.
Yep.
This next article, this next site that we're sourcing here is about Beyond WPath. What is significant about this piece here?
Okay. This is a counter movement called evidence-based gender-affirming care. It is a gender-critical approach. It does not want youth to be exposed to gender-affirming care. Now they make it sound all nice and pretty, and they say, look, let's leave it for them to get to be adults. We already know the statistics of what happens with kids who are not allowed to get gender-affirming care as kids. But this is a group of mental health professionals, public health scientists, allied organizations, and individuals. It's also filled with detransitioners. But this particular declaration is calling out WPath as having discredited itself for continuing its work in allowing youth and minors to receive some form of gender affirming care that they can transition in their youth and then be able to move on into adulthood. Now, a recent study has said that 98% of people who begin gender transition as a teen continue into adulthood with their transition. They are calling all of that into question, even though 98% of people have continued on in the process. We know that this is not as critically as harmful as they are pointing out. Are there people who would benefit from some supervision? Absolutely. Are there doctors who are going beyond protocols? Absolutely. But are we at a place where we want to throw out WPATH? No. If you are a transgender person and you run across somebody selling this, please inform them of what this actually represents.
Mm-hmm. Mental health benefits of gender affirming hormones for teens persist for 2 years in a new study.
I mean, this is fabulous. This is coming out in the New England Journal of Medicine. 300 adolescents were followed for 2 years after initiating hormone treatment. The results, basically show that there is an improvement of mental health and that these therapies are doing the work that they are supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
They are taking care of those issues, and kids are coming out in a healthier place than if they did not have them.
Well, and the interesting thing is when you talk about gender care for trans youth, you get the pushback of, but there are these detransitioners that, it was horrible for them. And if you look into the detransitioner stories, the ones that I found, the most vocal, that people are bringing forth, these are not transgender people. These are people who had mental illness, who were neurodivergent in some way, who needed a significant amount of help and were diagnosed as trans people and thus sort of sent down the pathway. That's bad. I admit that that's bad. But the solution to that is not to ban gender affirming care because it's a proven form of care that actually helps people. The situation then becomes a diagnosis. It's a diagnosis problem where there's something that needs to be addressed in that, but banning the gender affirming care as proven here is harmful to
Mhm.
the people that it actually helps.
Exactly. And again, the previous study that I cited, it was a 98% carryover from youth to
Mhm.
adulthood. So, yeah, they're arguing they're arguing on the minority. And in this case, there are arguments that can be made that there do need to be changes, but to throw out the entirety of WPATH's, you know, procedures and the
Validity.
interventions that they talk about, to throw all of that out when it is proven to be effective in saving kids lives
And improving the quality of their lives
and improving the
at the
quality of
base.
it.
Yeah.
It's we're throwing out a lot more than the baby with the bathwater.
Trans activist makes glaringly obvious point about Scottish gender bill and single sex spaces. I loved watching the video on this one.
This is amazing because Heather Herbert came out and just was point on in talking about why the issue of gender recognition reform needs to be dealt with. And Heather Herbert asked the person who was doing the interview, a journalist, when was the last time you needed to show your birth certificate when you went to the toilet? And after about a pause like that long, the journalist said, never. So Herbert goes on to add, nobody asks you for your birth certificate or gender recognition certificate or any other kind of documentation when you go to the loo or when you go to a single sex changing room. And this is the question that people have been asking. Allies have been asking those who want to say, well, transgender women don't belong in the women's restroom. They have been asking, who are you going to assign to check their genitals? I think we have an entire slate of Southern Baptists who are lining up for that job, but let's just kind of leave it there.
And what was the politician Kennedy who was for breast implants for
Yeah. Yeah.
teen girls? Facebook and Instagram may change their adult nudity policies to be more trans inclusive. That seems like good news.
Yeah. So now it seems that female nipples are, pretty much verboten on Facebook and Instagram. Um, Only very specific settings can and context can they be used, but there has been talk among the sort of the ombudsman of Facebook and Instagram, who basically says we need to reevaluate this, that so that transgender people are represented appropriately, so that individuals who really are impacted negatively by this can at least be treated equally to others.
Charlie McDonnell returns to YouTube after proudly coming out as trans. A lot's changed.
So, British YouTuber Charlie McDonnell, also known as Charlie is So Cool Like, stepped back from the public eye a few years ago and purged their account on YouTube. Now they have come back announcing that she goes by she, they. She began hormone replacement therapy, added that her first name is Charlie, and that she has plans to legally formalize that change. So we have a YouTuber who has pretty much, again, stepped out of the limelight to come back into their authenticity. There have been a couple of other big YouTube personalities who have done the same. So this is going to be an interesting thing to see what happens in this transition, so to speak.
Trans Miss Universe owner gives rousing speech about turning pain into power.
Yeah. So Jakafong Jaka Jakra Jutatip. I'm trying to work on that name. Or Anne Jukra Jutatip. took possession of the Miss Universe pageant package. So she owns Miss Universe, Miss Teen Universe, Miss USA, the whole shooting match. As Miss Universe was concluding, she stepped out on the stage and she says, it's been 70 years that the Miss Universe organization has been run by men, but now time is up. Now is the moment for women to take the lead. From now on, Miss Universe is going to be run by women, owned by a trans woman, for women all around the world to celebrate the power of feminism. So fabulous, fabulous, fabulous stance.
I love the strong association between trans and feminism and women's rights and female empowerment. Like all of those things are great. I'm so excited to see what she does with that organization.
Yep.
Moving on, a trans woman founded a group to help trans people leave the US due to rising levels of hate.
So Ren Willows is a 50-year-old transgender woman, and she was looking at, finding ways to leave the country because of everything that's been going on. But specifically, two things that have happened in her own life. First of all, in March of 2021, she was strangled in a public restroom nearly to death while she was traveling across the state for work. She says that there are like 30 states that I wouldn't even drive through. And then, of course, the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Ren is looking to create this organization called Transport. An organization allows trans people to become expatriates and flee the country. Ren herself is looking to move to Iceland. In fact, as I chatted with her this afternoon, she already has an apartment there. And I'm working up an interview, so I'll be talking with her next week to get a little more in-depth information about this. But we are looking at, the opportunity to see certain organizations begin to sort of pop up across the country and help transgender people get out of this country because it doesn't look good for many areas of it.
Yeah.
By
This
the way, there was
brave
two of those stories.
that's two in a row.
Yep.
The brave trans woman
Yep.
helping others flee. All right, let's move to Britain then. Trolls tried to cancel British Library for its gender neutral toilet, but it backfired badly. How did it backfire?
Twitter user by the name of Sarah posted a picture of two toilet doors in the British Library, accompanied by an emoji of a woman face palming. No, Beverly, the toilet didn't backfire. The effort to shame the toilet backfired, which when you get to shaming toilets, that's anywho. Both of the doors feature gender symbols, one featuring the male symbol, the other featuring male, female, disabled, and trans symbols. The door that the user took issue with is a single cubicle toilet designed for people with different ability and different mobility access. It is available for everyone, and it is not a large bathroom where everyone can go in at the same time. It just happens to be a single holer. But of course, people are going to step up and do the best to let others know how ridiculous they look. One user pointed out that's a disability bathroom, and it clearly states there's a women's restroom down the corridor. And it is. The sign is very clearly posted right there. There's a women's restroom down the corridor. The one on the left is a disabled toilet, so it is for all genders. The one in the right has urinals, so it's for men. Women can give it a go if they like. And the women's loo is across the room, but don't let facts get in the way. So Twitter came back on this person and just shamelessly abused them of any attempt they may have had to shame the loo.
North Carolina okays LGBTQ plus vanity license plates. What's going on here?
License plates with the words gay pride, lesbian, queer were previously not available, shockingly, in North Carolina. But for the first time in 20 years, the state's Department of Motor Vehicles reviewed its policies on the forbidden words at the direction of the DMV commissioner. So initially, the team from the department's Vehicle Services Division reviewed the list. After identifying entries as questionable, they referred them to a committee on communications, which basically 239 items were removed from the list, including more than 2 dozen terms related to the LGBTQ plus community. Now, still prohibited are terms like bisexual and gay sock, um, as well as some terms relating to reproduction and ethnicity.
Interesting. But on large part in North Carolina, at least on license plates, you can say gay.
Yes, you can.
Protesters at a drag queen story hour were met with a rainbow wall protecting attendees.
Baltimore, Maryland, which Baltimore should be one of the safest areas that we have. Um, the Baltimore Enoch Pratt Free Library was hosting a drag queen story hour. Across the street, a group of protesters showed up and, basically tried to cancel it. But counter protesters showed up and began to create.
Ireland reveals ambitious plan to become best place to be LGBTQ plus in Europe.
So LGBT Ireland has produced or has introduced a goal that over the next 5 years, they have a plan to make Ireland the best place in Europe to be LGBTQIAP plus. And it's basically a move to focus on research, LGBTQ plus awareness training, and combating anti-trans views within the country. It wants to aim to offer more help to LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers and advocating for certain legislative reforms in Ireland.
That's great. Looks like we need to put them in touch with Rin, huh? And
Yeah,
and make a direct pipeline there.
absolutely.
Nightlife safe space for LGBTQ plus community tested in Amsterdam.
So Amsterdam has always been sort of, the high watermark of anything goes, especially when it comes to being outside of societal standards. Right now, they are seeing, pushback from protests and violence in the same as many other places within the world. But now there is a portion of Amsterdam in the, basically the district where people go out at night that is creating a safe space for people of the LGBTQ plus community to go out and experience that nightlife and be able to go out as themselves because they were having to hide themselves because they didn't feel safe. So this is a direct intentional movement by the city of Amsterdam to sort of create this space for people to feel good and be able to go out and celebrate themselves.
That's wonderful. It's
Yeah,
sad that it's got to come to this, but it's wonderful that there is that
it is.
space. The Church of England, in our final story here, we're over time, but just barely. The Church of England apologizes to LGBTQIA plus people for shameful treatment.
So this is a good news, bad news, good news sort of thing.
Okay.
The apology comes days after the Church of England set out proposals developed by the bishops that showed that they were going to refuse to allow same-sex couples to get married, but said that priests could bless them in church, meaning they wouldn't perform the ceremony. They get married outside of the church. They came in and the priest would be able to bless the marriage. But then they come out and the bishops apologize saying, "We have not loved you as God loves you, and that is profoundly wrong. We affirm publicly and unequivocally that LGBTQI plus people are welcome and valued. We are all children of God. The occasions on which you have received a hostile and homophobic response in our churches are shameful, and for this we repent." The Church of England is, um, the official church of it is the official church of England. It replaced the Catholic Church, but this is a huge step forward. The Anglican Communion also was associated with the Episcopal Church here in the United States. That relationship has broken, but the Anglican Church now stepping forward and saying just after talking about we're not going to perform your marriages, but saying, you know what, we've kind of messed up with y'all in the past. Therefore, we recognize that and we repent and we're going to, you know, at least in word, make the effort to show you appropriate equal love.
I love you all. Thank you all so much for coming. For Genevieve Bergman, for Kari Aiden in the booth, I'm Emily, wishing you good night and good news. Thank you, everyone.